Welcome to the video on session 13 of the novel The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood. In this session, I'm going to analyze two chapters, chapter 20 and chapter 21. Now let us say chapter 20 analysis. Marian was walking slowly down the easel, keeping pace with the gentle music that swelled and rippled around her. She resented the music because she knew why it was there. It was supposed to lull you into an euphoric trance, lower your sales resistance to the point at which all things are desirable. Every time she walked into the supermarket and heard the lilting sounds coming from the concealed loudspeakers, she remembered an article she had read about cows who gave more milk when sweet music was played to them. She knew enough about it from the office to realize that the choice between two brands of soap or two cans of tomato juice was not what could be called a rational one. Which tomato juice can have the sexiest looking tomato on it, and did she care? She had caught herself lately watching herself with an abstracted curiosity to see what she would do. She glanced up from her list just in time to avoid collision with a plump lady in frazzled muskrat. She knew the noodle business. Several of her afternoons had been spent in the stores in the Italian section, counting the endless varieties and brands of pasta. Peter said he wanted her to really get to know some of his friends, and he had been taking her around with him to cocktail parties with the more official ones and to dinners and evening get togethers with the intimates. She had even been to lunch with some lawyers, during which she had sat the whole time silent and smiling. The friends collectively were all well dressed and on the verge of being successful, and they all had wives who were also very well dressed and on the verge of being successful. Marian found it difficult to connect these sleek men with the happy hunters and champion beer drinkers that lived in Peter's memories of the past, but some of them were the same people. This was why she had asked Clara and Joe to dinner. Though it was curious, she thought how married people always assumed they were being neglected when you didn't phone them, even when they themselves had been too dug under to even think of phoning you. Peter had been recalcitrant. He had seen the inside of Clara's living room once. She could not feed them milk and peanut butter and vitamin pills or a salad with cottage cheese. She couldn't have fish because Peter did not like it, but she couldn't serve meat either because what would they call or what would they think if she did not touch it? In the past 1 month, the few farms that had been available to her had excluded themselves from her diet. Clara and Joe had not been able to get a babysitter, so they had brought the children, hugging them up the stairs and putting them to bed, two in Marian's room and one in Ainsley's. Clara carted them out to the living room to reassure them and change them. Marian avoided about handing diaper pins and pretending to be helpful, but secretly wondering whether it would be bad taste to go down and get one of the many odor killing devices from the lady down below's bathroom. Joe buzzed about, whistling and bringing fresh supplies. Clara made apologetic remarks in Peter's direction. Chapter 21 Analysis. She had been seeing Duncan frequently during the past 3 months by collusion rather than by coincidence as formerly. She looked like someone who was hired to faces, take him out for walks. Marian was being, she supposed, what they called used. But she did not at all mind being used as long as she knew what for. She liked these things to take place on as conscious a level as possible. Of course, Duncan was making what they called demands, if only on her time and attention. She guessed that she was using Duncan too, although her motives eluded her. Whereas when she was with Duncan, she was caught in an eddy of present time. They had virtually no past and certainly no future. Duncan was irritatingly unconcerned about her marriage. He would listen to the few things she had to say about marriage, grin slightly when she would say she thought it was a good idea, then shrug and tell her neutrally that it sounded evil to him, but that she seemed to be managing perfectly well and that anyway it was her problem. He did not seem to care about what would happen to her after she passed out of the range of his perpetual present. The only comment he had ever made about the time after a marriage implied that he supposed he would have to dig up another substitute for Marian. Whatever the reasons, though she was always glad when Duncan telephoned, urgent and distraught, and asked her to meet him, she dreaded having Peter and Duncan encounter each other. An irrational dread because, for one thing, there was no reason, she told herself, why Peter should be upset. It had nothing to do with him. There was obviously no question of competition or anything silly like that. For another, even if they did collide, she could always explain Duncan as an old friend from college or something of that sort. That would make Duncan more nervous than ever and they would leave quickly. Marianne speaks about Duncan's roommates. They always act as though they think I'm trying to gobble you up. They walked on, turned another corner, and found themselves in yet another room full of cases. I come up here occasionally, Duncan said, almost to himself, to meditate on immortality. This is my favorite mummy case. Marian looked down through the glass at the painted golden face. She wondered whether she really thought so. Under the surface of glass, the form had a peculiar floating, drowned look. I think it is supposed to be a man, Duncan said. Sometimes I think I would like to live forever. Very well, preserved, Duncan commented in a tone that implied he knew something about the subject. Marian shuddered and turned away. Marian leaned further over the glass case. She found the stunted figure pathetic, with its jutting ribs and frail legs and starved shoulder blades. It looked like the photograph of people from underprivileged countries or concentration camps. When she moved away and glanced up at Duncan, she realized with an infinitesimal shiver of horror that he was reaching out for her. As long as you only think about the surface, I suppose it is all right and the real enough. But once you start thinking about what's inside, he felt more fragile than usual against her. She was afraid of holding him too tightly. She heard creaking of the parquet floor, opened her eyes, and found herself confronted by a pair of aster grey, scrutinizing eyes of the watchman. Duncan had suggested that they go for coffee, so they were sitting in a square, grubby surfaced table in the museum coffee shop, surrounded by groups of self consciously disconsolate students. Bahrain had for so long associated having coffee in a restaurant with the office and morning coffee breaks that she kept expecting the three office virgins to materialize across the table from her beside Duncan. Duncan stirred his coffee. You know, I think it might be a good idea if we went to bed, Duncan said conversationally, putting his spoon down on the table. She had been justifying whatever had been happening with Duncan on the grounds that it was, according to her standards, perfectly innocent. While Marian was folding the tablecloth, she heard her come upstairs. He heard Ainsley come upstairs, go into her room, and shortly afterwards her tremulous voice called Marian. She went into Ainsley's room, picking her way over the bogey surface of cloths that covered the floor towards the bed where Ainsley had thrown herself. But then they had the psychologist. He talked about the father image. She was on the verge of tears, and Marian got up and rooted around on the dresser until she unearthed a grubby piece of Kleenex just in case. Well, but you sort of knew that before, didn't you? Marian asked. Marian extended the Kleenex, but Ainsley waved it away. Ainsley wanted your baby and look after herself. But when she went to clinic, a psychologist told her that a father figure is as important as the mother figure, so she was upset because she was not married. After 2 minutes, the roommates got up and went out, and Duncan slouched back and sat down. Marian started to smile, then put her hand over her mouth. She had suddenly remembered all the things she could not eat. What do you think you will have? She asked faintly. Duncan shrugged. I mean, I don't care. I would just as soon eat hamburger any day, but you will be insulted if you don't eat at least some of what's on on your plate. She was thinking maybe I can say I'm on a diet. Oh, said Duncan. You are probably a representative of modern youth and rebelling against the system. I have always thought eating was a ridiculous activity anyway. When Marian and Duncan was sitting in the coffee shop of the museum, two friends of Duncan come over there and ask Marian to come over to their place for the dinner. But Marian was not interested as she could not eat meat and other things. She wanted only some salad, but she could not say I want only salad. That's why she was upset. She was thinking about what to do with the dinner party. Thank you for watching the video.